So in this section, we're going to talk about AI-guided Python basics. I want to make sure before we move forward that we all understand the fundamentals of Python. This is a beginner-friendly course, although we do cover some intermediate and advanced topics as well. Now, before we integrate ChatGPT and utilize it and leverage it to construct effective Python programming techniques, what I'd like to do is just make sure that we understand the basics and some of the fundamentals that are found in the Python environment. And honestly, all the skills that you'll learn here are universal and can be applied in any programming language. So we'll talk about user inputs, variables, we'll talk about conditional statements and control flow, control structures. Specifically, we'll get into like if statements and for loops and while loops and what have you. So just kind of like an overview. And with that, let's just dive right in. So learning about Python fundamentals is important. We need to understand that Python as a programming language, it's versatile and it's widely used in the programming world. Okay, so learning and mastering the basics, it really sets the foundation for advanced or future Python programming endeavors. And the reason being is because there's a ton of applications that you can do with Python, from web development to machine scripting and much, much more. We'll be doing some fancy things later on in this course, but we do need to start with the most basic level. So we're going to do that. Python is widely used in a variety of different applications and industries, such as web development, as mentioned, data science, AI, artificial intelligence, and much more. So now we're going to look at setting up the Python IDE development environment. So IDE is basically an integrated development environment. Specifically, Python has what we call an idle shell. An idle stands for an integrated development and learning environment. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be downloading Python, looking at the environment, and also we'll look at PyCharm, which is another IDE, so we can have another alternative. So let's just get started there. So we're going to start by going to python.org. Then you're going to click on downloads. And when you go to downloads, there are different versions depending on your operating system, whether you have Linux, Mac, or Windows. In my case, I have Windows. So I am going to go ahead and install the latest version, 3.12.1, and I'm going to click download Python. Now, if you do have Linux or if you have Mac, feel free to download that version and it should work according to your operating system. But once it is complete, you're going to go ahead and click on that, and then we're going to click install now. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let that install. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and download PyCharm. So in order to download PyCharm, you can simply just enter PyCharm into your search bar. And then under jetbrains.com, if you click here, you can go to download. And initially, you'll be prompted with a PyCharm professional version. There's a free 30-day trial if you do want to go for the professional version. However, you don't have to take that approach. And by the way, it does support all the operating systems as well, Windows, Mac, and Linux. We can go back and we can just select other versions, and PyCharm is awesome enough to have a free community edition available. So we're going to go ahead and download the Windows version of the community edition for PyCharm. Now you can see different revisions. The latest release date looks to be here, the 25th of January 2024. So we are going to go with the latest and greatest. So I'm going to go ahead and select Windows, the Windows executable version there, and we're also going to want to download that. So looks like Python was complete. Let's go ahead and complete the installation for PyCharm as well. Okay, so click on next, next, and I would say, if you want to have a shortcut, you can go ahead and send that to your desktop. Also, there is an update path variable. This is optional. I would recommend it. You don't have to do this, but basically it adds a bin folder to your path. Doesn't hurt. I think it just helps. So with that, you can just go ahead and install that. Okay, so while that's installing, We don't need our web resources right now. Looks like Python is complete here, so we can close this. And now you should have Python downloaded. So if I just, start entering Python in the search bar, it will come up and it'll give you the idle Python app of the version that you just downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And upon clicking on this, you'll see the idle shell, and it is ready for real time programming. You can see the operator there with the 3 arrows that indicates that it's ready. So for instance, if I typed in help, there you go. It's giving me prompt feedback, and you can enter in whatever programming command you want in the idle shell. The other thing you can do in the Python environment is you can select file, new file, and then on here, it will essentially give you the Python coding environment or development environment where you can write code and send it to the shell. So whatever code I write here, I can simply click on run and then run module. So I can just select run module and it will run the code and send it to the shell, or I can simply just hit F5 and it'll do the same thing. And we'll be looking more at this, but it is important for you to understand the environmental look and features of the idle shell. We're going to be using that consistently throughout the course, and we also will be looking at PyCharm. So PyCharm is pretty neat. It says here, do you want to reboot? That's because we requested to add the path to the bin folder, but that's okay for now. We can reboot later. So I'm going to click finish. Now PyCharm is really neat in the sense that it's visually, it's more visually friendly, and it also does provide the features or certain features that the idle shell doesn't have. For instance, it's able to auto detect errors as you're typing it. If you're typing code and you stumble across errors, it will detect that for you. So anyway, once I run PyCharm, it's asking me if I want to import any settings, but in my case I don't. You won't need to either if you're starting off. So just click OK there. And once you click OK, you'll be shown the PyCharm environment. And then you want to start with a new project. So click on new project. And once you click on new project here, it's very important for you to select the Python version. Okay, if you don't do this, you will fall into an error when you try to run your first script. Now, you're going to want to go with what the system detects. So obviously, as you saw, I downloaded Python 3.12. So that's what it detects here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Okay, so that's my Python version. I also want to create a main welcome script. Why not? Let's get an example going for us here. So I'm going to click on create on the bottom there, and it's setting up your virtual environment and the interpreter paths, and then there you go. You have a sample Python script, and if you look closely, we are going to be learning more about syntax and what have you, but you will see that it will print PyCharm. So I can click the run button here. So upon clicking run, you're going to see that it prints hi, comma, PyCharm. All right, so that's a little overview of the Python IDE environments that we'll be learning with. You're more than welcome to use either or, but I do want to make sure that I present both of them so that you have a good introductory understanding of each for your learning goals. Okay, so now in our journey here with AI-guided Python programming, obviously we want to be able to access OpenAI's ChatGPT. So if you've never accessed it before, we'll look at that. And if you have an account, great, you're a step ahead. So we're going to go ahead and start with going to, actually the exact URL is openai.com if you want to start there. And then you can just click on log in. Okay, so do recall openai.com. Click on login. And then in my case, I have a Google account, so I'm going to continue with Google. If you don't have an account, sign up. But for my case, I can just continue with Google. You can also do the same with Microsoft, with a Microsoft account or with Apple. So I'm going to continue with my account and log in. And then as soon as I do that, I'm already in here. So this is ChatGPT 3.5. There is also ChatGPT 4, but that is a more advanced version of ChatGPT, and it also requires an upgrade to the Plus model. In our case, we just simply need 3.5 that will suffice for the type of applications that we're trying to learn. So this is essentially the ChatGPT environment. You can enter in anything that you want here, and it's important for you to just know that this is where we'll be doing all our prompt engineering and our refinement of code, and using this system, this model here developed by AI for AI guided Python programming. So go ahead and access ChatGPT and make sure that you get to this page, as it's an important part of this course. So let's get into some of the basics here. So when you're dealing with any programming language, you want to learn about its syntax, you want to learn about its core fundamentals. So with Python, some of the core fundamentals, as I mentioned, would include user inputs, variables, conditional statements, and control structures. So the first being the user inputs. Now, what is a user input? It is exactly as it sounds. You're acquiring an input from a user, right? So you're going to develop some basic program to accept some input, and based on the input, you're either going to process something or you're going to send it throughout the flow of your code and ultimately achieve some output. So in Python, user inputs can be obtained using the input function, as you can see there, okay? So what the input function does is it accepts a prompt as an argument, okay? And we'll talk more about arguments in programming later, but essentially it's like basically a placeholder. It's something that it is waiting for to process. So it accepts the argument and then waits for the user to enter in some kind of data. Now, from a ChatGPT perspective, if you wanted to send in a prompt and you wanted Python to do the work for you, right? When it comes to, for instance, establishing some kind of user input algorithm or code snippet. Well, what you would do is you could do something as simple as this. So you can send in a prompt that says, provide Python code for a program that prompts the user to enter their name and then prints a personalized greeting. Okay. So that's what you see on the bottom here. So the user inputs example, you're basically accepting in with the variable called name, you're accepting an input, and within the input function here, as you can see in the parentheses, it states enter your name. Now that's exactly what the user is going to be prompted with, and hence that's why it's a user input. And then the print statement is going to do exactly that. It's going to print it as an output, and it's going to say hello plus the name being whatever name they entered in as their name. Okay, so this is just a very basic user input example, and we have sections in this entire, or rather, we have lectures and demos in this entire section that will go through multiple examples and how to use AI guidance for Python programming in your IDE or your idle shell. Okay, now if you look on the top here real quick, just to kind of skim back, think of this as sort of like the syntax of the input statement. So you want to get a user input with a prompt, right? And you would do that by establishing some kind of variable, and you would set it as an assignment. So you would use the assignment operator, and you would accept some kind of input using the input function. So this is sort of how the syntax looks like using the input function. And then ultimately, once you accept the input, you would print as we saw in the example on the bottom there. So print you entered, comma, some user input. In the case down here, we did some concatenation, which is just adding strings together, which again, we'll talk more about. But that's just a brief intro to the fundamentals of user inputs. Now, when it comes to variables, we did briefly look at a variable in the previous slide when we talked about name. So name was a variable there, but a variable essentially is just like a placeholder. You could think of it that way, or specifically it's a name given to a memory location that stores data. So think of, you give a name to something and that specific name carries some data, okay? And that data is kept in memory, okay? So every time you call that name or reference that name, it's essentially now a variable, and it's assigned to that stored data, if that makes sense. Okay, so variables, they act as a reference to the stored value. So I think it's a really easy way to think of it. So it's a reference to a stored value. Now, using ChatGPT or AI guidance, just as an overview, if you wanted Python code uh, given to you by ChatGPT, you can simply craft a nice little message there and say, give me Python code examples demonstrating the use of variables to store an age, height, and a message. Okay, so we're asking ChatGPT for three things there. We're asking it for variables to store an age, height, and a message, sort of like a personalized message. Okay, and that's the example you see here on the bottom. So variables example, you can see age is a variable here. Okay, age, we're setting it equal to 25. That's called a hard-coded value. So 25 is the hard-coded constant to this variable. Height is the second variable here, and it's set to 1.75. And then message is the third variable, and that's now a string, which is Python is amazing. Okay, and you can see that that's in single quotes because it is a string, and that goes with Python syntax. So the first two variables are integers, and then the bottom one here, the message, is a string variable. Okay, and on the top here is just basically, again, another example. X is equal to 10. So here X is the variable, and it stores the value 10. Okay, so this value 10 gets stored in X, just like this value 25 gets stored in age, 1.75 gets stored in height. Python is amazing, gets stored in message. So anytime you call any of these variables, it will give you that stored data. Now, basic operators. So there's a bunch of operators that Python supports, much like many programming languages out there. But some of the common ones include arithmetic operators, comparison, Boolean, also known as logical operators, and assignment operators. Okay, so Python supports a variety of basic operators for performing different operations on variables and constants and other values found in the environment. Okay, so we want to look a little bit deeper into each of these operators because we are going to be utilizing them. And again, the beauty of this course is you need you simply, I mean, having minimal to no programming experience for this kind of course is ideal. I mean, you don't really need to be a master of Python. You don't even need to be a first-time user of Python. If you've never even heard of Python in your life, think of it that way. This course still applies to you because what we're learning to do eventually is to leverage AI to develop Python code for us, right? And as I mentioned in the former lectures, what we want to do is we want to sort of, join the force, this booming force in our 21st century digital AI age, where things are going to be automated using AI. We want to stay up to date with the market. We want to stay up to date with the trend, right? Because sure, it is true, AI is going to replace jobs, but it's going to bring in a lot of jobs as well. And you want to make sure that you're within that market space. And learning this kind of content will help guide you towards that direction. And so that's the goal here. So you don't have to be a Python master, let alone even a beginner. If you've never heard of Python in your life, that's absolutely fine. This course applies to you as well. So taking a prompt like this is sufficient, will help you understand some of the basics. So show me Python code with basic operators. For instance, perform addition and check if two values are equal. So what you need to learn to do in this course is how to prompt AI, ChatGPT, or any bot system, bot tool, how to prompt them the right way so you can get your desired Python programming output, right? How to get your code, how to refine it, right? So, but in order to do that, we first have to learn about these fundamentals. So with basic operators, that's a crucial one because basic operators are going to be used throughout this course and in your development in the future, in your AI guided development, or if you want to go and just code Python even without AI, you still have to know the basic operators. So If we did send that prompt in to AI, it would give you something like this. Here's a basic operators example. X is equal to 10, Y is equal to 5. So we just talked about variables. So those values get stored in each of those variables. So 10 is stored in X, 5 is stored in Y. And now we create another variable called sum underscore result. That in itself is a variable. And that variable is equal to X plus Y. That's a basic arithmetic operation. Again, this is just an introduction, an overview. We're going to get into all of these in much more detail with AI guidance, but just to kind of give you the idea, okay? So X plus Y is equal to sum result, and then here we're checking, we're doing a comparison. So here we're doing an arithmetic function or operation, you can say, and then here we're doing a sort of comparison operation. Is equal, is underscore equal, checking for is X equal to Y. Now, you can see here, this is an equal sign. This is a double equals. We'll talk about that as well. But briefly, this is the assignment operator and this is the equality operator. This assigns this variable to this X equals Y here. And then this double equals is checking for equality. So it's going to give you a logical true false. Is it equal or not? And obviously, you can see here, is X equal to Y? No, it's not. So that would obviously give you a false. All right, so moving along, talking about expanding on the basic operators. We'll look at each briefly. So basic operators, arithmetics, then we'll look at some of the other ones. But with arithmetics, basically, they're used to perform mathematical operations on numerical values. I mean, again, it's one of those things that do as they sound. They're arithmetic operators, so they will perform arithmetics, okay? So they're math operators, basically, think of them that way and simple. And some of the most common arithmetic operators you'll find again in almost any programming language, but the syntax may vary a little bit. And some of the most common ones include the addition, so the plus, the subtraction, minus, the multiplication, which is an asterisk or a star, however you want to say it. Then you have your division, which is your slash there, a floor division. Interestingly, it's a double slash. Your modulus is a percentage sign, which returns the remainder. If you're not familiar with modulus, we'll look at that. And the exponentiation is 2 asterisks. Now, looking at the example here, we're setting a equal to 10 and b equal to 3. So again, these are two variables. And then we're printing a function using each of these arithmetic operators. So we're doing a plus b, a minus b, a times b using the asterisk, a divided by b, and then we're doing a floor division, okay? And that basically cuts off your precision, your decimal point there, and gives you like the integer whole, okay? A modulus b and a to the power of b. So you can see the answers on the right here, okay? Which makes sense, right? So if you have a is 10 and b is 3, so 10 plus 3 is 13, 10 minus 3 is 7, all the way down the list. It all makes sense. And that's just a basic example of arithmetic operators and sort of their syntax and how they look like when you apply them. Now, when it comes to the basic operators, the comparison operators, now here we're comparing 2 or more values. They could be more than 2. And ultimately, you're being returned a Boolean result, a true or false. So some of the common comparison operators, which again are found in Python and any or most programming languages out there, include the equality, which is the equal to, which is just a double equal as we saw in the former slide. You also have the not equal to, which is an exclamation mark with an equals next to it. Okay, so that means that signifies not equal. Then you have the greater than, less than, which are standard in math. And then you have the greater than or equal to, which are just connected. Or you have the less than or equal to. So looking at an example here on the bottom, you have x is equal to 5 and y is equal to 10. So hopefully now we're starting to get the idea of variables and assigning stored values to the variable. So 5 gets assigned to x, 10 gets assigned to y. And then we're just doing like comparisons here. Well, we're checking, is x equal to y? This print function is just going to output, the result, okay? So is x equal to y? Well, in this case, it's false because they're not, right? How about the next one? Is x not equal to y? Well, that's true, right? They are not equal, therefore it is true. Is x greater than y? Is x less than y? And so on, okay? But all of these results are correct, and they're just based on the comparison that you're trying to draw here. So the other operator is the assignment operator. And here, assignment operators are used to assign values to variables. So there's different types of assignment operators. There's the equal, the plus equal, the minus equal, the times equal, divide equal, modulus, and assign. All of these are assignments, right? Floor, divide, and assign, exponentiation, and assign. So these are pretty cool because what they do is they update the value of a variable based on its current value and another operand. Okay, so let's look at an example here. So here we're saying x is equal to 5, right? That's the most basic assignment operator. We've been learning that. We've been looking at that thus far. Well, look at this one. What about x plus equals 3? This assignment operator essentially means the same thing. It's equivalent to saying x is equal to x plus 3. Okay, so whatever x is, it's going to take that value and add 3 to it. So if we print x, it's going to print 8. Why? Because x is 5, plus it's adding 3 to that 5. Okay, and that gives you 8. So that's the whole idea of assignment operators. You can do a plus equal. They're just like, think of them as like shortcuts, right? Shortcuts to assigning. Sure, you can write things out the long way and put x is equal to x plus 3, but a shorter way of doing it is just x plus equals 3. And that's it. It does the same thing. But this right here, x is equal to x plus 3 and x plus equals 3, they do the same operation. It's just with the assignment operators, it's a lot quicker, right? It's more simplistic. And you'll find with ChatGPT or AI bots in general, they will output assignment operators in this manner. That's why it's important for us to learn it so that we can read the code that AI generates for us and be able to interpret a little better for our learning skills and our increase. Next would be the logical or the Boolean operators. So these are used to perform logical operations. They're commonly used in conditional statements, which we'll look at more, and expressions to control the flow of a program. So whenever you want to like control the flow of your code, this is a great operator or operators to consider because they take various comparisons and then they give you a logical output. So you can take a whole comparison A and a comparison B and then compare them and then get an output out of that, right? Because I mean, comparison operators, again, they give you true or false as an output. Boolean operators also give you a true or false, but they look at multiple true false conditions. So logical operators include some of the most common operators. If you've never heard of them before, the most common ones include the and it's called literally the and operator. The next one is called the or operator, and then you have the not operator. And you would want to study the Boolean operators a little bit more, which again, we'll touch more on that. But the easiest way I explain to students as to how to understand these Boolean or logical operators is to think of them exactly as they sound. Because what does and mean, right? So, I want to go to the store and I also want to go and pick up some pizza, right? So and means I want to do this and this. It means both are true. Well, what if I said that but with an or? I want to go to the store or I want to go and pick up some pizza. Well, now it's this or this, right? And then what about not? I do not want to go to the store, okay? It's just simple, basic human English, but we're sort of transforming it, or our understanding needs to be transformed into the programming realm, and we need to understand that from a logical perspective. But it works the same way, right? So look at the example down here. P is equal to true and Q is equal to false. Okay, that's what they're set to. So look at the first example, P and Q, right? Again, in order for you to get a true output, both of them have to be what? They have to be true. Okay, so P and Q, we can see that you have one false, the Q is false, so it's not going to work. It's going to give you a false, right? The only time you're going to get a true is if both are true. That's how and works, because both have to be true for and. Whereas the or is different. The or just requires one of them to be true. So here we have P is true and Q is false. So obviously if P is true, then it's true because it's or. It's one or the other. Okay? And then you have the not. The not just simply takes the opposite relation. So not P, well, what's P? P is true. So not P means it's the opposite. It'd be false. Okay, so again, that's the basic idea of Boolean operators and how to use them. Really cool stuff. We'll look at this more. And again, the beauty of all this when it comes to AI guided Python programming is you don't really have to understand all of this in detail. It's good to know. All of this is good to know. But with the direction that technology is going, you don't need to know every single syntax anymore, right? I mean, we're stepping it up a notch here. So what we're doing is we're just learning the basics because it's going to help us with readability, with understanding the code, right? It'll make you a more proficient programmer, sure, and it'll help you kind of use AI guidance better. So that's the benefit of learning programming still. But AI can do most of the work for you. It's important for you to understand the basics as much as possible, though, so that you can work with AI, right? Think of AI as like your partner, your partner in crime, right? It's like an intern working with you or a student like you who's sitting down right next to you and you're working together, right? So you know some things, they know some things. So think of AI like that, right? It's a bot, it's a program designed to facilitate your work and make your life easier. But it won't know every single thing, right? It has its limitations and capabilities as you do. As a human being, you have your limitations and capabilities. But shared knowledge is power. So if you have some knowledge, AI has some knowledge, you can leverage AI and you can use your own knowledge and integrate it together. And that's the ultimate goal here. Okay, now with control flow structures, they are used to control the execution flow of a program. Obviously, that's exactly as they sound. They help make decisions. They repeat code. So they repeat certain actions based on conditions. They handle errors, which is a really neat feature. So if an error occurs, they can go back and revise or fix it or run it again. So all of that happens with control flow, or they can output a certain error, or certain errors, a list of errors, and they can also organize code in a structured manner. They're really good at doing that. So if you wanted to prompt, for instance, ChatGPT to do something simple for you with control flow, you can construct a simple string that says something like this: provide Python code for an if statement that checks if a person is an adult or minor based on their age. Okay, and if you did that, you can simply get an output like this: control flow example, if statement, age is equal to 18. So if the age is greater than or equal to 18, print you are an adult. Else, print you are a minor. So based on the condition. So as you can see, age is equal to 18. That's a hard-coded constant. Age is the variable. But if this variable age is greater than or equal to 18, in which case it is, right? Because it's equal to 18. Remember, this is greater than or equal to. It's going to print you are an adult. However, if age, for instance, was 17 or 16, for instance, the case would be else. It would skip over the if code and it would go to the else and it would print whatever's under the else. And that's how control flow structures work. So based on a condition, it's going to run certain parts of the code or the other parts of the code. It all depends on what conditions are met. And that's how control flow works. But again, by simply learning how to prompt ChatGPT, it will help you to acquire the exact code that you're looking for and work on it and enhance it ultimately. And it does help to understand the basics in this regard. Okay, so control flow structures: if, elif, else. This allows you to execute different blocks of code based on specific conditions. Okay, so you support checking multiple conditions. So with the if statements, you can have as many conditions as you want. As we saw on the previous slide, that was just an example of a control flow, but specifically the if, elif. Elif, think of it as like else if, right? So either this or this or this or that. That's kind of what, if I were to translate it into like pseudocode, that's kind of what it would sound like here. So if condition 1 is met, then execute whatever code is under that, okay? Now, if condition 2 is met, then you're going to run that code. If condition 3 is met, run that code. So it's going to just keep checking the conditions. And if none of those are met, it's going to just do whatever is under the else condition, okay? So it does support checking multiple conditions, and that's the beauty of control flow structures, is they allow for a multitude of various options to condition, select from, and run codes All right, so then you have the loop. So looping, um, we use that for iterations. So we use that for running code more than once, for repeating code. You can execute blocks of code repeatedly as many times as you want for a known number of times or for a unknown number of times. And that goes into the idea of for loops and while loops. So with for loops, that's used to iterate over a sequence. Usually it's when you know how many times you need to iterate, how many times you need to repeat. So when you have a known number of times that you need to do something, you want to use a for loop. Okay, that's the basic concept of a for loop. The while loop is a little different. That's used to execute a block of code based on some condition being met, or in some cases not being met, right? So that's how the while loop works. Looking at an example here. So if you look at the top here, here's an example of the for loop, of using the for loop. So here you have fruits, and then you have like a little list here: apple, banana, and cherry. So for fruits in fruits, we're going to talk about loops much more later, but right now I'm just introducing the basic idea, right? So for fruit rather in fruits, so it's looking for one fruit in fruits in this list here, print fruit. And what this is going to do is literally it's going to print each of them one by one, because it's going to look at how many elements there are in this list here, and then in this list it's going to execute each one and then print each fruit in order: apple, banana, cherry. Okay, whereas here in this while loop example, we're setting a count equal to 0. That's just a way to initialize the counter of a while loop. And a while loop, again, it executes code based on some condition until a condition is met or not met. So while the count is less than 5, you're going to print count. Okay, so as long as that condition is met, it's going to keep printing. And sometimes you can even fall into something called an infinite loop because you won't ever reach the condition. But in this case, we are going to definitely reach the condition because we have a counter here on the bottom. So while count is less than 5, you're going to print count. And then you're going to do the assignment operator that we talked about earlier. Count is equal to count plus 1, or just count plus equal 1. So it's going to increase by 1 each time. It's going to increment by 1 each time, right? So count less than 5, the first time it runs, you're going to print 0. And then the second time, it's going to be 0 plus 1. So then it's still going to be 1. Is 1 less than 5? Yes. So then it prints 1. And it runs again. So now this will it'll increment it to 2. Is 2 less than 5? And so on, up until it reaches 5. Once it reaches 5, the while loop terminates. Okay, it ends because the condition has been met. Okay, so that's the concept of while. In this section, we're going to be talking about intermediate Python programming concepts with AI guidance. Mainly, we're going to be discussing data structures and functions. We'll start with data structures, so we'll talk about lists and tuples and dictionaries and sets and things of that nature. And then we'll look at functions, basically how a function looks like, how it's constructed. And obviously, we'll be integrating AI with all of these details. So the first thing we want to do is just have like a brief overview of understanding data structures and functions. So essentially, if you've never heard of what a function is a very popular idea in computer programming. But a function is basically like a block or a structure of code, and it's an organized, reusable set of code. Specifically in Python, it's established using the def command, you can say. So you can say def, and then you could give the function a name. And then you can have arguments to your function that you can call whenever, or you can send through your function whenever you want to call that specific function throughout your code. So we'll talk more about functions a little bit later, but you can basically see on the bottom there's an example of a function. So you have definition here of greet. So greet is the function name, and then in there you have an argument for the name. Then you have basically things that would be returned. So hello plus the name of whatever name is sent in when the function is called. But again, we'll talk more about functions. Data structures in general, they facilitate efficient data storage and manipulation. So there's a lot you can do with data structures. And we'll get more into this when we talk about lists. We talk about tuples, which are almost basically the same thing. We'll talk about dictionaries. We'll talk about sets, right? So we'll look at data structures in much more detail and understand the applicability of these different data structures, when to use them, how to use them, and of course, how to get AI to guide us towards generating code for all of these data structures. So just a brief overview of data structures. When we talk about lists versus tuples, we'll talk about those two first, just as an overview. A list basically is like an organized set of data. Okay, so it's like an ordered, organized set of data based on mutable data, mutable sequences. And mutable is just a fancy word for something that is changeable, something that is subject to change, something that can change. Whereas basically tuples are different. They're immutable, and that means the opposite. It means that you can't change the data within that list. Okay, so basically a tuple is like a list, and the only difference is you can't change the data in there. There's good reasons why you would use a list over a tuple, which we'll talk about. A dictionary is kind of different in that sense. Contrary to lists, they're actually unordered sets of data. So you have key value pairs in this case for quick data retrieval. So they have their applicability, they have their application. There's necessary times where you will need to use a dictionary over a list or a tuple. And then of course you have sets, which are also unordered sets of data, but it's like a collection of unique elements, and that's why you call it a set. So we'll dive more into each of these data structures in more detail. Firstly, working with lists. So what are lists? Again, a list is a versatile data structure used to store a collection of items. So if you have like a collection of items, a list is a great consideration there. AI guidance, when it comes to lists, does really well in providing a set of data that you're looking for, depending on what you prompt it. So it will help you. It will help you basically manipulate the data that you want from the creation stage all the way to the optimization stage and final stages of development. And again, a list, as mentioned, is a mutable set or a mutable storage of items. Okay, so anything you put in there can be changed. You can change data in a list. Okay, so look at the example here, the prompt that we sent to ChatGPT. So if we want to focus on AI guidance here, you're going to want to prompt AI properly with the appropriate information. So here what we're going to do as an example, we're going to ask ChatGPT to create a list of integers and demonstrate how to append and remove elements. Okay, so we're asking for a basic list creation, and then additionally we also want it to append and remove elements within a list. You can basically take out some elements, you can input some elements. Think of list, if you've ever worked in other programming languages, sort of like an array. Okay, it's just Python has its own verbiage, it has its own selection of words that it uses. Okay, so you can think of it that way if you wish. Now, here we have two examples. Well, we have a my_list created for the list name, and then in here you have just a simple list counting from 1 to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as integers. And then on the bottom here, what we're doing is we're appending and removing. So you would do the my_list.append, and then you would select which one you want to append. And then you can also select which element you want to remove. Okay, so you could prompt ChatGPT to do all this for you, and we're actually going to look at a good example or two of real world applications using lists. Then you have tuples. So again, tuples are similar to lists. The only difference is they're immutable data. So in this case, you can't change the data that's built into a tuple. And notice instead of brackets, which lists use, a tuple will use parentheses. So do keep that in mind just to distinguish the difference there. But AI guidance will help us to handle tuples better and offer more efficient approaches when using tuples. Now, again, there are cases where you want to use a tuple over a list, and some examples, or an example of that, for instance, would be if you're dealing with SQL databases and you have like a primary key in a SQL database and you don't want that information to change, or let's say you have sensitive information, login information, whatever it is that you want to keep for security purposes, you might want to use tuples in that case to protect and secure the data so that it's immutable, so that it doesn't change. Whereas a list is something where you would have data that you will frequently be changing. You'll updating, you'll be appending, removing, adding, deleting from that list. So do keep in mind the difference there. Now, if you want to prompt ChatGPT to uh, provide us information about tuples, for instance, or say you want to understand the difference between lists and tuples, well, AI guidance is more than qualified to do so. So if I were to just like simply ask ChatGPT to explain the difference between lists and tuples in Python by example, it'll give me an example of a tuple here. So what it does, it shows me a tuple and it shows me how to create it. In parentheses, it prints out 1 to 5, similar to the former example in the past video on lists. So in this case, we're looking at tuples. And when you look at the difference there, again, you see that this information here with the tuples can't be changed. So if I were to try to append or remove or any of that, it won't allow it. Python will basically throw an error. Okay, so you'll get like an exception. It won't allow you to change any of the data in here. Whereas with lists, you would be able to change the data in there. As you saw, we were able to append and remove. Here, we wouldn't be able to do that because, again, lists are mutable. They can be changed, whereas tuples, they're immutable. They cannot be modified. So now, when we talk about dictionaries, dictionaries are a little bit different. They're key value pairs used to store data, and they function a little bit differently than lists and tuples. And AI guidance is great with helping us here because it streamlines the whole process of dictionary creation, dictionary management, optimization, and improved performance. So prompting ChatGPT to create a dictionary would look something like this, just to give you a practical example. And we'll look more at like real life, real world examples soon. But create a dictionary representing student grades and demonstrating how to update grades. So say, for instance, I wanted to create like a whole dictionary of a student followed by their grade. Okay, so here, for instance, I have Alice, 90, Bob, 85, and so on. Okay, so that's what you call a dictionary. So now you can store a collection of data, okay, as opposed to lists and tuples, where you're only storing like elements. Here, you're storing sets of data, and they're followed by colons and commas. They're controlled by colons and commas. So Alice, colon, grade, comma, right? So student, colon, grade, comma. And you can create whatever you want with dictionaries in that sense. And again, AI guidance is there for us to help us create dictionaries in seconds. But it's good to understand just the basics of these data structures for intermediate Python programming development so that we have a better idea, so that readability for us is enhanced and we're able to work with AI to create effective Python programs. So here on the bottom, you can update grades if you want here. So I can say student grades, Bob, and I can select a specific element in the dictionary here, and I can change it to 88 instead of 85. And then if I were to run this code and say student grades, it would print the new dictionary for me. So that's a brief of how to work with dictionaries and prompting ChatGPT accordingly. Then we have sets. So sets are kind of the opposite here. So they're unordered collections of unique elements. And they have some similarities with dictionaries, but when you talk about a set, you have different sets, right? So you can have like set 1, set 2, set 10, as many sets as you want. And you can call a specific set within another one, or you can intersect them. So there's a lot of fancy things you can do with sets. But AI guidance enhances set manipulation, optimization, and also builds on efficiency. So you can create, for example, you can prompt ChatGPT to do the following. Create 2 sets of integers and demonstrate set intersection, one of the applications of sets, right? So here I have set 1, which numbers, or it's numbered from 1 through 5. Set 2 is numbered from 4 through 8. And then what I do is basically I create a set, I set basically an intersection, and I call it intersection, just simply intersection, and I say equals to set 1 dot intersection open parentheses set 2. So what I'm doing there is I'm intersecting set 1 and set 2. So sets allow you to do that as one of their applications. And again, we'll look at an example as we've looked in the former data structures. We'll look at an example as how to apply sets for practical applications. Then we have functions. So a function, this is kind of intermediate as well. It's part of the intermediate list of things that we want to talk about here. But a function is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task or action. So we looked at one example early on with the greet function. So you can have like a greet function and it can say hello plus the name as an argument. Here's another example, right? Generate a function template for calculating the mean of a list of numbers. So now you can have ChatGPT to basically create any type of function that you want. And you'll notice that ChatGPT creates functions quite often in programs that you prompt it, or in needs that you have, in programming needs that you want to fulfill. So here's a function template for calculating mean. So say for instance, I wanted to calculate the mean. I basically create a calculate underscore mean function. I would obviously use the def command there. So def calculate mean, and I would open up the arguments that I want. In this case, I just have one argument and it's called numbers. So I can insert the numbers I want. And then I have within the function some variables here. So the total is equal to the sum of the numbers. The count is equal to the length, which is len of the numbers. And then the return is basically the total divided by count. So anytime a developer, or in this case AI, calls calculate underscore mean, it will call this function and insert arguments, insert numbers to this function. Those numbers would be passed through total and passed through the count variable, and then ultimately it will return the total divided by the count, which is exactly the formula for calculating the mean. So as you can see, by creating functions, AI guidance improves function creation and usability. Functions are used for all types of applications and programming needs out there. So it's important for us to at least understand what functions are and how they work, how they look like, so that we're able to distinguish them in our code and, again, just gain that stronger sense of readability. Sure, we do have AI guidance available to us, but at the same time, it's extremely helpful and sort of an enhanced level of programming if you're able to understand what functions are and work with AI accordingly. Say for instance, hey, you forgot what the Boolean operators are in Python. You can just simply prompt ChatGPT, because remember, ChatGPT is also a means to help you learn Python further, right? For self-directed learning. So you can just simply prompt it, what are the Boolean or logical operators supported in Python, or just in Python? Okay, and it'll just give you a list of each and explain each one with examples. So the first being the and, x and y, x or y, the not, okay? And then it'll even give you like an example of each. So if you have true and false, A and B, A or B, not A, right? So remember, and or not, they are exactly as they sound, which is what I always say. So and means that both of them have to be true in order to give you a true, or only one of them have to be true, and not is basically takes an opposite relation, right? So if it's not true, it's false. If it's false, if it's not false, it's true. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So say I wanted some assistance here, AI guidance on how to write a Python program to check if a user's input is, and this is just a very basic check, less than, say, less than 10 and greater than 2. Okay, this is just something very basic, and we want it to be simple, and we do want it to use Boolean if possible. So you can see here, it didn't use Booleans, it used comparison operators, which is okay, but I can just simply ask it to use the and. Okay, so it says this program uses the logical and operator to check if the user's input meets, but actually don't necessarily see that it uses and verbatim. So please use the and operator verbatim. And let's go ahead and get that output there. So there it is, the and, as opposed to the former example where it didn't necessarily have an and, it just had the sort of the before and after between the variable, which is, you can do it that way certainly, but if you wanted to use the and, you're going to check if the user input is greater than 2 and if the user input is less than 10. And then, if it is, then it'll print numbers less than 10 and greater than 2. Otherwise, the number is not within the specified range. So let's take a look at this in Python. So we're going to click on this and just create a new Python file. And this time we're doing Booleans. So we'll just call that Booleans and drop that there. We're on current file and then we run that. So enter a number 5. So the number is less than 10 and greater than 2. Okay, so if I run this again, let's say I enter 1 this time. The number is not within the specified range. Cool. All right, so that's one example. So say I wanted to write a different kind of program. So write a Python program that will, and we're going to make this one a little bit more meaningful and applicable to, say, the real world. So write a Python program that will check to see if a student is qualified for a scholarship. The requirements are that the student needs to have a GPA of 3.5 or higher, and also they need to be involved in at least 2 voluntary, or you could say extracurricular or voluntary activities. Okay. You can even expand on that and say, or they need to have a GPA of 3.2 and be involved in at least 4 voluntary activities. So now we're just really expanding our Boolean needs here, right? So let me go ahead and enter that and let's see what it gives us. All right, so get the student's information. GPA is equal to flow of the input. Enter the student's GPA. Voluntary activities. Enter the number of voluntary activities of the student. All right, cool. Great example. So check the scholarship eligibility of the student. So I love this example. It's using comparison operators. It's using Boolean logical operators. This is a great example for us to look at. All right, so you can see here if it's greater than or equal to 3.5 and their voluntary activities is greater than or equal to 2, or the other case, if it's greater than 3.2 or the voluntary activities, or rather, and the voluntary activities are greater than and equal to 4, then they will be qualified for the scholarship. Otherwise, they don't meet the categories for, or the requirements rather, for the scholarship. So let's go ahead and copy this in and play around with it a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and paste it and run. And then the first question is enter the student's GPA. Let's start with the 3.5 or higher. So I'm going to enter 3.6 here. Enter the number of voluntary activities. Okay, so the number of voluntary activities here, say, would be 2. Okay, which is their minimum. Congratulations, the student is qualified for the scholarship. Now let's play around with this a little bit. So let's rerun this because we're going to get an idea of the Boolean logic here. So say the student is a 3.6 GPA, but they were only involved in 1 voluntary activity. What do you think is going to happen? Now, if you guess that they're not qualified for the scholarship, you're right. And that's because look at the logic of this code. The logic of this code says that they have to have a GPA of 3.5 or greater, and remember the Boolean logic, and have be involved in at least 2 or more voluntary activities. And in this case, yes, they do have a 3.6 GPA, but they're only involved in 1 activity. So that's why they don't qualify. Okay, so hence the application of logical / Boolean operators. So let's run this again. So this time the student's GPA is a 3.3 and the number of activities they were involved in were 5, so they do qualify, okay? And again, let's look at one more example. So say a 3.4, and they were involved in 2. Nope, they still don't meet it because their GPA is what? Lower, remember. So because it's lower than a 3.5, what happens is the check goes here, and it checks to see, okay, yes, it is greater than 3.2, that's true. But then you have this and. Voluntary activities also has to be greater than 4. So the first thing it does is it checks this, okay? And if this is true, then it's done. It's going to qualify you. If it's false, it's going to try again, and it's going to use, because you have an or, right? So it's going to go with the second criteria and see if you meet that one. And that's how or logic works. Either this or that, one or the other has to be true. And if both are false, then you don't qualify. Sorry. Okay? So that's a Boolean example there. Let's look at one more. So this is a fun one. So write a program that simulates a traffic light operation. Something simple like that. I mean, the concept itself seems simple, but actually there's a lot of code involved there. And you can see here it actually used, you know, while loops and time delays. Time delays are essential, and it used a function. So I'm going to modify this, and I'm going to ask it to do something else. Rewrite it to make it simpler, and use Boolean operators to code this problem. Okay, let's see what it does there. Okay, so it's using the while loop still, and I don't really see that. Okay, so use the Boolean operators verbatim. Okay, for instance, if the traffic light is not green or yellow, then it must be red. So this is sort of like a traffic light check test. Okay, think of it that way. That's what we're trying to do there. So let's see if we can get something like that. There we go. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Something to kind of check the conditions of the traffic light. Maybe you want to check the quality of the traffic light, for instance, if you're a traffic engineer. But let's say, okay, rewrite this without using functions because we haven't really gotten into functions yet. So we write this without using functions, okay? There we go. So this is just a traffic light simulation, and here are the different Boolean indications. So it's just a simulation. So in this case, it's making the red true. So this is a simulation of a red light. The green is false, the yellow is false. So if the red and not green and not yellow, if all of these are true, then it's going to say red light stop. Okay, because that means if the red is true, in which case the variable here is true, the green is false, and the yellow is false. Okay, and then here's a simulation of the green light, and here's a simulation of the yellow light. Cool. What if we wanted to make those user inputs? That would be fun. So now you can say, can you make it so that the states of the traffic light, and you can even give it, make it more specific, i.e. is red, are user inputs. Let's try that. That way we can actually just get the user's input and ask them what are the states, and then based on that, you know, we'll get some determination, some outputs here. So let's play around with this. This is a pretty fun example here. All right, so we're going to drop this here, and let's run this code based on our prompt. All right, so is the red light on? I'm going to just say false. Okay, is the green light on? And I'm going to say true here. Okay, is the yellow light on? Well, false. Okay. Green light, go. There you go. Cool. All right, so I can stop this and say I wanted to rerun it. Is the red light on? I'm going to say false. Yeah, sorry, red light is false. Green light is false. Yellow light is, yes, it's true. Yellow light, prepare to stop. Cool. And you know what? It can keep asking you, so it's gonna loop and ask you again and again. So that's one way to do it. You can even enhance this code if you want so that it understands that, well, obviously, if the red light is false, and the green light is false, then it doesn't even have to prompt you if the yellow light is true. So you can certainly do that. Sky's the limit. And that's the beauty, again, of AI guidance and coding with ChatGPT as a means to facilitate this type of work. Well, here we are. We've reached the end of the course. And I want to close by talking about just a recap of the course conclusions. So what are some of the main takeaways? What can we leave knowing that we've achieved and so on? So I think the first thing for an AI guided programming course, one of the main learning objectives was to harness the power of AI. So to have that kind of AI driven mastery. And I really hope that that's a learning skill that we've all gained. So to be able to take the power of AI, elevate your Python proficiency with it. And we looked at beginner, intermediate, and advanced topics, which leads to the next course conclusion, comprehensive learning. So from fundamental to advanced topics, we've unlocked hopefully a new level of expertise, new ideas, and new gateways for you to consider learning Python on a deeper level with the aid of artificial intelligence. And then also interactive experience to have that personalized ChatGPT assistance available to you. So thank you so much for embarking on this journey with me and going through the whole AI guided scheme and applying it to the Python world and being able to integrate and look at the synergy of AI and Python. And I hope that you can stay engaged in this topic. So stay relevant, stay engaged, and apply your new skills. So skills that you may have learned in this course, do take those skills and apply them accordingly to meet your coding endeavors. I'm sure we all have coding plans or ideas or goals. Maybe you're looking for a career in AI, or you wanted to sharpen your skills to prepare for the future, or you're just really interested in learning more about Python using AI guidance and having it as your personalized assistance. In any case, stay engaged and follow your coding dreams, your coding endeavors. And keep prompting, keep prompting ChatGPT, keep coding, keep having fun, continue exploring, innovating, mastering AI plus Python with confidence. And I'll see you next time.